Stoten, and today I'm talking to Yoav Zingher, who is the founder and CEO of Launchpad.build. Yoav, let's start with a quick introduction to you, because you've got a really interesting background. You've worked in different parts of the world, and you're now in the heart of Silicon Valley. Tell me what brought you here.
Sure. So I first arrived here almost 2 years ago now. So it was just after I sold my last company, which was a company called KiWi Power, which was a green energy company. I started KiWi in my living room, sending emails to National Grid back in London, basically we were helping to manage peaks on the grid instead of using really polluting and expensive fossil fuel power stations. By actively and smartly managing demand on customer side. And over the time period that I was doing it, we sort of saw the rise of solar and wind, and especially the rise of batteries. And we built some of the really exciting first big battery projects in the UK. But the sort of, the real interesting part for me was the fact that we were going into large industrials, almost all of the large industrials in the UK, and quite a few in Germany and France as well. And basically integrating with their systems to turn down their demand at peak times. But to do that, we had to understand how they do, what the manufacturing process was like, to know what can be interrupted to save energy. And that really got me a real sort of insider's view across multiple industries on how people work the way they do. And it was quite surprising to see from somebody from my background's computer science, and I've got an MBA, so never really got my hands dirty. And seeing how industry works was a real eye-opener. Anyway, so in the end, KiWi was pretty successful. We sort of had operations in 8 countries and sold to Engie, which is a large utility. And this idea of coming back to manufacturing really stuck with me.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting there is you came into that industry exploring it and very quickly became a disruptor and a transformer within that industry, and that was part of your success. And to a degree, that's what you're looking to do in the manufacturing space. What frustrations in terms of how manufacturing is traditionally undertaken were you trying to answer when you were kind of visualizing this Launchpad ecosystem?
It really came from 2 directions, I guess. So the first was what I was talking about, seeing so many different industries, seeing how they do things, seeing how much that I expected to be automated wasn't, and where things were automated, how, because I was interfacing directly with their controls and directly with their systems, just how old school it was. And so that means that things are inflexible, super difficult and expensive to maintain, and particularly to change. So that was sort of one side. But the other side was as an actual consumer of these services. So one of the things that we did at KiWi, we needed basically a box that interfaced with any kind of industrial site to hook up to air conditioners and motors and pumps and do some smart things like smart metering and frequency response and all this kind of stuff. And at the beginning, we were buying this stuff off the shelf from large companies, and we kicked off a project to actually make our own. And sort of spoiler, it worked. We sort of got our installation costs down from $5,000-$10,000 down to a box which, when I sold KiWi, was quite below $100, which was fantastic. But it was just pure torture to get there. It took us from sort of thinking of the concept and having a design to having something in my hand was more than a year. And that was one. And then to be able to get it to the point where we can actually install it in hundreds of sites. In the end, we went 3,000 installed, different boxes installed and that kind of stuff. To work with multiple assets took even longer, and it just stuck with me. Like, when I write some software, I can write it, compile it, see the results. I've made a bug, I can iterate and keep going, and that just doesn't exist really in hardware. What's stopping us from doing it? It's this difficulty in automating. It's the programming that needs to go into automation. And if we could remove that by having a smarter way or a different way or a smarter and different way of getting machines to do what we need them to do, then we could really reduce that cycle time and make it much easier to make new products, make it much easier to scale up existing products, and possibly open up different kinds of business models as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's exciting for me there, Yoav, is you come at it from a customer point of view rather than coming at it with, 4 decades of manufacturing experience, which is kind of where the traditional EMS industry comes at it. We've always done it this way. This way works, and we're going to stick with that. And what you've highlighted is that's actually incredibly painful for an innovator or a product developer. So that's the desire to shake things up.
Right, and it's somewhat the same way that I entered energy, actually. So now I'm an expert, right? I've been doing it for the better part of 15 years. I was doing energy, but we had always operated a grid in a certain way with a certain kind of fuel mix, and that was that. We had a centralized grid that distributed things to the edges. There wasn't, there was no back and forth, and it was very much a particular way of doing things, and it wasn't going to work forever. We had all these problems. We still have all these problems with externalities, and it required a different way of looking at things. And that different way doesn't mean the old way was wrong, right? It's just that the old way doesn't let itself go towards the new, of distributed and whatever. And I think that I think it's a similar sort of dynamic over here. What I will say is that the current way of doing things works great, but it has its limitations. And the pain points in particular are lower volumes, newer products. And so that's where we're starting. We think long-term, the technology we're developing, because we're very much developing technology, can be applied in lots of places, but we're very focused on where we want to start and the problems we want to solve.
Yeah, and when we look at it in terms of timing, one of the I think there are a couple of differentiators in terms of what's happening now. One is the shift in the market expectation as we've gone through this, this interesting crisis this year, which has really exposed certain things in the industry in terms of a need for digital transformation and an acceleration of that. But I think the other is the digital building blocks that go into that, the capabilities we've got driven by developments in AI, driven by developments in automation and robotics. Do you see it as that perfect storm in terms of timing, in terms of both demand and what's available to you to actually make this happen?
I think that's about right. So when we started thinking about Launchpad and started doing our proof of concepts on the technology side, you hit the nail on the head. AI is required for this, not for everything. AI is not a catch-all. It doesn't fix everything. And actually, I would say that AI just as often is applied to the wrong kind of problems where it's not so great at, as it is to the kind of problems that it is. And that's a danger, and it's important to know what it can do. But at the same time, AI, we've seen it, right? We can see what's happening in the world of technology around us. We can see the things that were simply not possible have become possible. You get into a Tesla, it can drive itself for a large extent, for a lot of what you needed to do. That was not possible before we had AI. Machine translation has suddenly got to a point where we take it for granted that you can just see a web page in a different language and have it translated in real time. That was not possible in any way close to remotely being, real world useful. So when you apply it to the right places, it's very useful. So that's what kicked our interest into looking at this. All of a sudden, this tool, which is, it is a tool, it is a different way of doing things, and it is different to the way things are done using traditional programming techniques and traditional geometry. And we should apply it. So that was the driver. I would say that's a technology-enabled issue. But like you say, this year we've just seen a fair amount of disruption and people questioning how things are done. I don't think we've seen the end of it either. And that's just on the sort of the optimist in me says that it means that people have more of an open-mindedness to try and do things differently because they suddenly have this kind of space to do it. The sort of the realist in me says they kind of don't have a choice. They know that people are not going to be on a plane and flying to China every couple of weeks and spending months and months over there. And it's just not gonna, if you can provide an alternative, people will probably take it. So I think it comes from both places. To
Yeah.
say nothing of the supply chain issue, which we've all experienced and continue to experience.
Yeah, no, I think all that disruption is driving towards you know, this kind of ideal, and I think that's really fascinating. I see the pandemic as an accelerant of the need for digital transformation rather than the actual motivation, because the motivation's been there through tariffs and through all kinds of other disruptions in the past. We've seen, you know, Fukushima and various other things, and we'll see different things in the future. We don't know what the next disruption will be. So I think creating something that's more digitally enabled is really valuable. Talk me through a little bit, and not too much detail, but kind of an overarching view of your vision of how Launchpad will look to an innovator when they're ready with their new design.
Sure. We get really excited about this. So if I'm going too technical, just tell me. But on a high level, what we want to be able to do is to give somebody who has an idea the tools to be able to turn that idea into a finished product that they can sell or use or whatever they want to do, as easily as possible. And the sort of the vision for this is that if you have an idea and you can design it, you can have it produced in quantity within days or weeks, not months or years, maybe not years, but a month or a year, which is more typical today. From a user perspective, the way this is going to work is a really simple and friendly app that you can take your design, upload it, and immediately get, and when I say immediate, I mean instant, because we think that's really important, a whole bunch of feedback, including what it's going to cost to make for 1 unit, 10 units, 100 units, 1,000, 10,000, feedback on how the product, how all the parts are going to be made and how they're going to come together, how the product will be assembled, whether there's any issues that stops it from being assembled, and if necessary, assistance to solve those problems if you don't want to, or if you can't. And effectively, we've designed a workflow that goes from design to finished products just with a couple of clicks. Very importantly, without having to have a bunch of back and forths waiting for other people to respond. We think that's one of the most important things. People are super important, but you know, if every time you went to Amazon you had to wait 24 hours until somebody told you if the particular item is in stock, that wouldn't work so well. So all these kind of things, and we've got a number of enabling technologies in the background to do it. I'll talk about the three sort of big areas. So one is the web software, and I've sort of described it, and we're starting to demo it to some people now, and it's pretty exciting. The second part is sort of the heart of how we're doing it, which I'm simplifying dramatically, but effectively we're using simulation technologies. And so if you imagine a computer game, which is kind of boring because instead of shooting aliens, effectively the computer game is every part of a product and every machine that goes into making and putting those parts together. And by putting it into a simulation, we can then use AI techniques and other techniques to run for what would in the real world be an unfeasible amount of time to solve a problem, because AI requires an awful lot of data. But in simulation, you throw computing power at it, and it can solve problems in a very fast real world time frame using a lot of computation power. So that's the second part. The third part is the physical machine that's going to put these things together, which we've designed. And if you sort of imagine the machine is a multi-purpose machine that can do a bunch of different things in a cell connected together. The important part is that, because there's lots of machines already out there, the important part is we need a controlled and constrained environment to be able to simulate. This only really works if you can simulate things. I'm not going to say the word perfectly, but I'm going to say good enough to be able to then take those things that have been learned in simulation and apply them to the real world. And the key is that this machine doesn't need to be programmed. Its programming comes from the simulation. So when you link those three things together, you have a super easy to use web app for the customer that wants to make a product, a set of simulation tools that turns that design into the things that need to happen in the real world, and then a machine that can execute those things in the real world. So
Yeah.
that's what we're building, and we have a number of steps to get there. That's from the user perspective.
That's the vision. Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. And when you look at certain parts in that process, what it feels like you're actually doing is creating a really detailed, really well-costed, well-documented digital twin of the product and a digital twin of the product's manufacturing process, and then obviously using your advanced automation systems to do the final assembly. But you also outsource and have an ecosystem of manufacturing partners for things like the PCBA, and I guess things like the the CNC tooling, the plastics, the other elements, and you're able to price those instantly as well to give that quote to the customer. Is that a correct reading?
Yeah, absolutely. And the sort of the key is we want to make everything super easy for the user, but without trying to invent every piece of the puzzle ourselves, because we think that's going to be unfeasibly hard. Like, this is already going to be quite hard. Hardware is difficult, and everybody knows that, but it's also important. So just because it's hard doesn't mean you don't do it. You just have to approach it in the right way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating, Yoav. When I look at what's happening this year, and I think of what I'm seeing when I'm talking to companies and talking to CEOs in terms of the fallout from 2020, is we've got a decade that started horribly, but I think we're going to have the most innovative decade we've ever seen, and it's an acceleration in innovation as well, because everybody's seeing shifts in demand, everybody's seeing shifts in business models, everybody's seeing disruption. And it's anything they thought, well, maybe we'd look at doing that over the next few years, is like, let's get it done now. I think there's a real acceleration there. Is that what you felt when you started to talk to, I don't know, investors, potential customers, potential partners? Is there that desire to listen to new ideas? Is there an openness to change that there hasn't been perhaps before?
I'm from the UK, which, Europe, not Europe. Things are very, very different over here. There's much more of a desire for things to change because people see the possibility in doing something new and doing something different. And definitely, I don't know if it's a function of the time and geography or both, but 100% I'm seeing very, both from the customer side and from the industry side, I would say. And I think that's really important, because this is something which, if you take a step back and think about it, the thing that's going to drive innovation, the thing that's going to drive wealth creation, is when we start linking the things we're good at together. And the fact is that in the US, we are the world's biggest consumers, and we are the world's best innovators. And when you link those two things together to be able to let consumption drive the data that then innovation can use in order to create the technologies that then produce things, you get a virtuous cycle. And if we can make that, and we don't have it today, not really, because it's broken in a number of places, but there's no reason not to have it. We could have that, and if we did, we'd have this just value creation, wealth creation engine, which is going to make the rest of this decade look terrific, if we make it happen this way.
Yeah, and the US is kind of, and where you are in Silicon Valley, it's a unique environment, and you're in a unique position to be able to do that there. Curiously, and just as a sidebar, we're right in the middle of election season. We're seeing the candidates come out with manufacturing policies, to me, that don't feel like they're appropriate for the digital age. They're kind of old school ways of trying to bring jobs back. We don't want to bring low paid, poor work conditions jobs back from the environments that they went to. Do you see either candidate thinking about the digital transformation in their incentives, and is that something you think they should be looking at?
Yeah, we think about it a lot, and the truth is that they're not. I've read through the policies. On one side, there's no policy exactly on another, but there's certain actions that we can look at. And I think the way you characterize it is kind of right. They're looking to recreate the glories of the past rather than embracing what could be in the future. And the problem is, actually, I think we can draw a parallel from the environmental and power sector. We tried a number of policies to bring back coal jobs, and those policies didn't bring back coal jobs. And it's not because they were failed policies. Those policies, if the world was where it was 30, 40, 50 years ago, would have worked great, but it isn't. For example, coal is no longer cheaper than solar. And so even if you do all the things that you want to, that's not going to show growth over there. Another example is coal mining is a heavily automated industry now. And so even if you do increase the amount of coal consumption, you don't necessarily increase the number of jobs. I think we're going to see a same sort of thing over here. And that's a good thing. If you look at the way most of our products get made in countries like China, the working conditions, the salaries, people's abilities to live good lives with those jobs, it's not great. It's not something we want to replicate over here. I think we would do a lot better if we didn't try to recreate those jobs over here in those working conditions and environmental conditions and all the rest of it. But if instead we embraced automation so that we can move up the sort of the value chain, let people instead of earning, effectively $5 an hour doing manual labor, let them earn $50 an hour in doing much higher level designs, and that's we didn't invent this concept. The world has already been through this, with America being the leader. Going from an agrarian society to an urbanized one, it's the same dynamic.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Yoav. And the point you made earlier, I think, is really fundamental, which is leveraging the advantages you've got, which is having that huge consumer market there and having that reputation as the innovation hub of the world. And I think if those can be part of an industrial policy, I think that's hugely advantageous. As I say, I think digital disruption is the order of the day, and I think it will be going into 2021. I think some really exciting times for you. I'm looking forward to watching and seeing what Launchpad does over the coming months, and as you roll out your strategy and your equipment, I'll be talking to you again to see how that's going. But in the meantime, thanks for your time, and let's talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.